One of the things that my granduncle used to always say is don't get too comfortable in America, because we were very comfortable in Europe and look what happened. So I always keep that in mind whenever we hear and see warning signs. If the Holocaust didn't happen, it would be unthinkable in the United States. Because it happened, and it happened not long ago, it sadly is something that we do have to think about, of what happens if something like that could happen here.
If you heard what I heard. This podcast shares the powerful stories of Holocaust survivors, told by their grandchildren, the last generation to ever hear Holocaust survivor stories firsthand. So join me as we listen, learn, and remember. Together, we can make sure the world will never forget so that it never happens again. My name is Carolyn Siegel. I'm the founder and executive director of If You Heard What I Heard. Today, I'm honored to be here with If You Heard What I Heard interviewee and advisor, Dr. Ira Savetsky. Ira is a board-certified plastic surgeon with a practice on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and with his wife, Lizzie, a fierce and dedicated advocate for the Jewish people, speaking out against anti-Semitism and bringing awareness to current social issues surrounding anti-Semitism, Israel, and our people. Ira's grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, but sadly passed away before Ira was born. Ira shares the story of his great-uncle, Adolf Feuerstein, who was like a grandfather to him for If You Heard What I Heard. Ira, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Ira, why was it important for you to share your story with If You Heard What I Heard, specifically your great-uncle's story?
So that's a great question, Caroline. So I think that today, particularly in a post-October 7th world, it's Holocaust education and retelling the stories that were told to us from our grandparents and our ancestors becomes even more impactful, as we see in a post-October 7th world where people are basically declining that October 7th even happened. So even further, Holocaust denial has been around since the Holocaust even happened. So we have a responsibility to keep these stories alive and to basically give firsthand accounts to the stories, which I think is really important. So I think now more than ever, even before October 7th, it was extremely important. And now more than ever, we need to continue to keep these stories alive.
Yeah, I mean, we filmed your interview, I think, in 2021, and we filmed a while ago, and definitely well before October 7th, but still with anti-Semitism rising even at that point. And I think we got in touch because I reached out to you on Instagram, and it was like does he check DMs, right? So I'm very happy that you check or happened at that point to check your DMs and connected with us. Was there something about our organization specifically that, interested you in sharing your story? Because I know you probably get approached often to speak and share your story in such amazing ways. And I'm just curious, what about If You Heard What I Heard resonated with you?
So what I really loved about the organization is I was really catered toward 3G's Holocaust survivor grandparents. And since the Holocaust happened almost 80 years ago, the focus has obviously been about letting survivors tell their stories. And unfortunately, as survivors are starting to no longer be with us, it is now up to my generation and our generation to keep these stories alive. So I think it's amazing to have this platform, this organization that will help amplify the stories that we heard when we were younger.
Yeah, it's a really unique position that we're in as the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, because we are the last generation that will ever hear these stories firsthand and be able to say, this is what it was like to grow up with this person. This is what it was like to see the number on their arm, or this is what it was like to witness their pain. And I know that you were very, very close to your great uncle, and you shared that you heard his stories growing up, like from the time you were little, right?
Yeah, I heard his story from the time when I was growing up, and I remember him coming to my school growing up on Yom HaShoah and telling his story to the whole school. And I always had a sense of pride when I would see him up there, because I knew the magnitude of what it meant to be a survivor and to be able to stand in front of a group of young Jewish students and to tell your story. So I always knew it was a privilege to be able to tell the story, and for me to today to continue to keep his story alive was very important for me.
Yeah, we're really grateful and honored that you're such a big part of our organization. You do so much for our organization in so many ways and a lot behind the scenes that like people don't even see. You're constantly there to provide guidance to me and in building the organization, and a big just shout out and thank you for all you do for us.
Thank you for having me a part of it.
Oh my gosh, such an honor. So your great uncle, he by the time we recorded your story, like he had already passed. And so, what was the process like for you in preparing for your interview? Because I know that you already knew a lot about his story, but I'm curious if you did additional research or talked to family members, and if there's anything new that you learned in the process of either sharing the interview or preparing for the interview.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, just re-speaking to family members and also any resources available that would help gather information. And honestly, also just looking, researching the town and city where he grew up and where that is today on the map, because those borders have changed so much over the years, and where he grew up is now technically part of Western Ukraine. And so it's really fascinating to really get a different angle on things. And I spent also hours listening to his original Shoah testimonial, and I definitely learned a lot just from re-listening to everything, because you definitely pick up more and understand more as an adult than you do as a child.
Yeah, it gives you a different perspective, and now you've got three young ones of your own. So having that perspective of even being in the position of your great grandparents, like what that must have been like for them. I remember you sharing in your interview that they heard Hitler on the radio and that Hitler sounded like a monster, and some of the things that we see in our society today with regards to anti-Semitism, it's really scary. And so have you at all in the midst of so much anti-Semitism today thought about your great grandparents or your great uncle and the position that they were in before the Holocaust?
Yeah, I think about it all the time. One of the things that my granduncle used to always say is that we were very comfortable in Europe. We lived a very privileged and comfortable life. And he always would say, don't get too comfortable in America, because we were very comfortable in Europe and look what happened. So I always keep that in mind whenever we hear and see warning signs in the United States, that to always understand that what had happened was unthinkable then, and what's unthinkable, if the Holocaust didn't happen, it would be unthinkable in the United States. Because it happened, and it happened not long ago, it sadly is a something that we do have to think about, of what happens if something like that could happen here.
It's so interesting because as 3Gs, I think we have a built-in warning system, like an internal trigger that happens for us maybe a little bit earlier. I don't know if it's fair to say that as a general statement, but I'm noticing that recurring thread and theme with a lot of our interviewees, that there's like this internal sort of like, oh, there's anti-Semitism. What do I need to do? How do I prepare myself, my family for the tides changing?
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. And also, there are other parts in the world where anti-Semitism has progressed even more than the United States, and we see Jews leaving those areas and making and immigrating to Israel. And I agree. I think we definitely are at a heightened level of detection compared to maybe people our demographic that don't have survivors in their family. Obviously, there are plenty of people who have ancestors that had to flee Iran, and the Middle Eastern Jews. The things that they've gone through are sometimes overlooked because of the Holocaust, but they suffered tremendous persecution as well. But I do think that us as 3Gs, we definitely are prepared in many ways.
Actually, one of my favorite things that you said was at an event that we did in New York in May. And you spoke exactly about that, how your great uncle said, we were comfortable in Europe. And so we're comfortable here. We have to pay attention to what's going on. But I love that you said this, that don't run away from your Judaism. Don't run away from it because it's not going to save you in the end anyway.
Yeah, that was one of the other things he would talk about. German Jewry and many of the Jewish communities in Europe, or Vienna, for example, was so assimilated. It was the most assimilated Jewish community probably in the history of our existence. And the more assimilated you were did not help you from saving yourself or your family. So I think we often get caught up in trying to blend in, and I think we always have to keep in mind that we need to stay true to ourselves, and that assimilating within among sort of the current society that we're in is not going to help us. Yeah, and I think in a post October 7th world, I think we definitely see Jews embracing many parts of their Judaism, and I do think that sometimes, right, there's nothing like a little bit of anti-Semitism to remind you that you're Jewish and your culture and your religion. And I think we see people embracing a lot of their values more so today.
Yeah. Our community, I think, has definitely come together in ways that are beautiful in the wake of all of this tragedy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we have to figure out a way how to sustain it, because I think that, as things potentially, hopefully normalize and things get better, usually it gets better for a short period of time and then something happens and it gets worse. And now I remember in 2021 when Israel had gotten attacked by Hamas and Israel responded, and there was a miniature uproar compared to what we see post October 7th, but it was there, it was present, there was marches and then Israel was getting pummeled on social media, and then it got better for a little bit, and then October 7th happened, and then all of a sudden it was 100-fold of what we saw in 2021. And as things maybe get better now, it's just going to take something additional, and it's going to be 100x than what we saw after October 7th. So we have to be sort of prepared for that. And I think in the meantime, we need to, as a community, continue to stay together and to embrace our Judaism and our values.
It's really interesting because you and Lizzie have been advocating and doing this amazing work to advocate well before even 2021. I mean, you guys have been doing this for, I think, maybe 10 years before. Like, when did you start advocating, or you've always felt that was important?
I personally always felt strongly about my connection to Judaism, my connection to Israel, and I was always sort of unapologetic for both of those things, and Lizzie as well. So it was never like, oh, we're gonna, dedicate our voices to advocating for Judaism or Israel. It just was part of our makeup, and we sort of were passively advocating, I guess you could say. And then I would say over the past few years, it became more of a focal point of sort of our voices, and Lizzie's platform, she really dedicated to it. And I think it was because part of it was because the rising levels of anti-Semitism, the rising levels of hatred or demonizing of Israel. And I think we both felt that now more than ever, our voices were needed.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I can't speak for everyone out there, but personally, thank God. Like, I feel so grateful because what you guys do and how you use your platform does make a huge difference. And I think it educates in a way that is relatable, similar to if you heard what I heard. We're trying to educate in a way that's relatable. And that's what's needed right now. And I mean, honestly, Ira, you are unapologetic about it. Like, there was something that you posted, I think, a while ago. Were you wearing like an Israeli flag like outfit and someone came? Can you tell us something?
Yeah,
What happened with that?
that was very impulsive. I came home from work and I saw outside of our apartment, I saw this massive march of, anti-Israel march, pro-terrorist march marching down our street in New York City. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this is happening right in front of our building. So at first I was just going to grab like a big Israel flag and go downstairs and just sort of wave it. And as I was going down, Ronit, Lizzie's assistant, was here, and she said, and Lizzie was like, or she was like, go put this on. And it was actually like a full Israel flag shirt and pants. And oh, go put these shoes on also. And it was like blue and white shoes. So I was basically, and it wasn't even, it was Lizzie's like outfit. So it was like skin tight. So I went down there. By the time I changed, they had already sort of made further progress down the street. So I went to my doorman. Oh, then Rennie was like, "Oh, grab the doorman's scooter, see if he'll let you borrow it." So then I grabbed, said he let me grab his scooter as like an electric scooter, and then I was wearing this full like suit, and then I just went down to where they were. They were ended up marked like protesting outside of Grand Central Station. So I just went over there, and I was just kind of, my presence being there, being in a full Israel garb, really made them unhappy. So that's sort of the background story. But
Were you
it was very impulsive and not premeditated.
Oh my God. Were you like, I need to grab pepper spray? Like, were you scared? I mean, I think that that's like another thing as being a 3G. Like, I avoid situations like that because I'm like, you know, I don't want to
Right.
get
I
thrown
mean,
in there.
I think those type of marches that they do is to intimidate and to invoke fear in many of us. And I think that by us allowing that is a way for them to sort of have victory over us. And I think that showing up in a counter protest manner does help, because if people see that we're not scared, then it becomes their tactics basically are not being achieved.
Do you think that part of the impulse to do that, to even just like grab an Israeli flag and go down there, was like, was any part of that influenced by your Holocaust survivor family?
Yeah, I think so much of my everyday is influenced by my grandmother, my great uncle who survived, and obviously the members of their family that did not survive. And I think that, we have a responsibility to stand up to situations like that, and to stand up to hate, and to stand up to those who are trying to intimidate us. And I think that had we had maybe more Jews prior to the Holocaust doing that, maybe things would have been different. Probably not, but at least I could go to sleep knowing that I tried, rather than allow these things to happen.
Speaking of your family that did not survive the Holocaust, do you feel the fact that they're missing today? We feel it in our family because our family is really small. So like, when we look around a dining room table, there are cousins that we don't have because of the Holocaust that we still generationally feel.
Yeah,
We feel
I
that.
mean, yeah, there's definitely, my whole mother's side of the family is very small, and like you said, we're missing many cousins. I think about my mother, who didn't grow up with grandparents, which we sort of obviously take for granted because many of us did grow up with grandparents. And I think about my kids who have all four of their grandparents alive, which is amazing. So it took a couple of generations to get to this, you know, normalcy with my kids having their grandparents, and just having that sense of a full dining room table, or having holidays with cousins and grandparents. But it took a few generations to get back to that.
It's kind of crazy. I'm sure even for you growing up, you could feel that at your table that there were people missing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a blessing that look what you and Lizzie have created within your own family, that you have three amazing kids who, God willing, will grow and create their own families, and just gives us something back as a people.
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, we're only now at the point where we're at the numbers of sort of pre-Holocaust world Jewry. Like how many years it took us, 80 years or so to get back to that number, which is pretty incredible. It took quite a while.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're still working on it.
Still working on it. And that's another reason why it's important for us to embrace our Judaism, and assimilation is more of a factor to our population than anti-Semitism. And I think that another way to keep our nation strong is to stay strong to our values, and for Jews to marry Jews, and to have children. And I felt like having 3 kids was important because you need to have 3 to grow the nation. 2 sort of just keeps it as is. Not everyone could have kids, and not everyone could have 3 kids. And we had our own struggles, but I do feel like it's important, if you're able to and you're in a position to do it, to have lots of kids if it's possible.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Actually, we have a number of interviewees who either had 2 or had 3 and said, you know what, I want to have one more. And I think a lot of that is influenced by the family that was lost in the Holocaust. Like we lost so much that what can I do to bring it back, or make it
Absolutely.
okay? Yeah. You and your family were in Israel on October 7th. Like I remember texting you and being like, you okay? Do you guys need to get out? What's going on? And it was a thing. Like you guys couldn't get out for a while. But I also think that there was a piece of you that didn't maybe want to leave, right? Like it must have been like a torn decision because you had 3 young kids. And from a safety perspective, it's what do we do? Do we get out? Do we stay? This is our homeland. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in Israel with your family on October 7th and some of the steps that you took immediately? Because I know that you guys bought meals for IDF soldiers and really tried to help locally where you were.
Yeah, we were there celebrating our youngest child, our son, his upshearing. So his first haircut at 3 years old. So we were there for about 2 weeks, and we were on such a high, just going all over the country. And we had his upshearing in the old city. So it was like a really amazing trip. And then obviously on that day, October 7th, we were obviously shocked like everyone else. I think that it took, no one really understood the gravity of what was happening. We were getting very bits and pieces of information throughout the day. The numbers kept going up of people killed, and nobody really had a sense of what was happening, and there was a lot of confusion. We were basically just locked down at the hotel. But I do remember feeling in many ways safe because I felt like we were where we were supposed to be as Jewish people. We were in Israel, and I felt like the people that we were around were had a similar mindset. Obviously, I want to protect my family, make sure they're safe and everything. There was never a time where I really felt like we were unsafe. We did see the Iron Dome going off in Jerusalem. The one thing that the eerie thing was that if you went outside, it was just completely empty and devoid of any vehicles, and you couldn't really see any. There was no police, there was no army, so that was a little bit interesting. But yeah, when it happened, we did actually have a flight booked on El Al, which I never fly El Al, but I happened to have flown El Al, so we did have a flight booked out a few days after. But people were trying to get out as soon as possible. We just sort of kept our scheduled flight, and while we were there, we were just trying to do whatever we could do. I did contact friends that are doctors there, and to see if there's anything that I could do. I looked into staying to see if there was any way I could volunteer in terms of helping anyone that was injured. But the feedback that I was getting, that they were okay for that time being. And it did feel weird leaving. When we left shortly after, it felt like we were abandoning our family, and it didn't feel right. And we felt like that we needed to come back as soon as possible, just to see if we can help in any way.
And you have been back. You've been back to volunteer, actually, right?
Yeah, so we've been back several times. I think three times since it's in the past year. I've been back to volunteer, and I spoke at a medical conference there, and then I spoke at a conference at Soroka Hospital. Then I volunteered there as well, and I did surgery on soldiers, and it's been amazing. Just not just me, but seeing everyone activate themselves and volunteer and raise money and get boots to Israel and drones. I mean, it's pretty. On the one hand, it's like it's shocking to think that so many of these things we have to do it, but it was also amazing to see how many people stepped up and contributed either themselves, money, or both, and so that was pretty amazing.
So, specifically through the lens of being a 3G, you know, being in Israel at that time, was there anything that you drew on from your Holocaust survivor family that impacted that time for you, or anything that you told your kids or were reminded of because of your family that went through the Holocaust?
Yeah, I think that we've heard so many terrible stories where we unfortunately can't count on human beings to do the right thing. And I think that on the one hand, like we spoke about earlier, we have this internal radar that like people are capable of doing terrible things and to be on guard for that. And then on the other hand, just sort of having this survival instinct in you and do whatever you would need to do to survive. And I think that, nobody knows how they would react in a dangerous situation or a terrible situation. But it does give me strength knowing that my grandmother and my great uncles did survive under terrible conditions. And it's almost like who knows what we're capable of. But yeah, I think just making sure everyone was safe and keeping guard up and eye on the situation was important for me.
Both you and Lizzie continue to face and have faced numerous incidents of anti Semitism firsthand. As the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, what's that been like for you to deal with that?
Yeah, I think that it's a reminder that it's the oldest form of hatred and it's alive and well. And I don't take it lightly. And obviously, any significant threats do get reported to police and FBI, and we've had to do that multiple times. But, a lot of it is intimidation and to try to silence myself or Lizzie. And I think that just does the opposite to both of us. It sort of motivates us to keep going. And I think that because of what our family has gone through, it sort of gives us, we have a responsibility and a duty to speak up in these situations.
Yeah. It's like that warrior mentality, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're raising three proud 4Gs, great grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, who unfortunately will not get to hear your family stories firsthand from your great uncle in the same way that you did. So, and I know that your oldest, Stella, has really taken an interest and really taken it upon herself to carry the legacy forward. And I'd love to hear more about that and, what you think is important for your kids to keep in mind, especially with everything going on today in the wake of so much anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think it's been a focal point of our family to keep these stories alive. When we were there in Israel over October 7th, one of the things we did was we went to Yad Vashem and we walked through the museum, and I remember Stella looking at like a 3D model of Auschwitz and the cremation, and they had like little model children waiting online to get put in an oven. And I remember her saying like, what did they do? And I think that her having that sort of instinct to understand that they didn't do anything and this is just a terrible thing that happened, and this is the story of the Holocaust. So I think that we've always made it a focal point At some point, we'll take them to the camps and to Eastern Europe in general to get a sense of what life was like before the Holocaust, and obviously the Holocaust itself. And one interesting thing for me when I was at Yad Vashem in the Book of Names is that I looked for all my family members, and my namesake, who was the brother of my grandmother and great uncle, I was always told that he was shot and killed with his young wife and child in the streets when the Nazis were coming through the town. And interestingly, in the Book of Names, it said that he was killed at Majdanek. So I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly is the true story. I mean, all I know is that he was obviously killed during that time, whether it was prior to concentration camp or during or whatnot. So we're continuously trying to learn more about our families, and I think that our kids see that and take great pride in that.
What do you think it means, especially Stella being the oldest? What do you think it means for her to be a 4G?
I think she feels the responsibility on her to keep the stories alive and to understand that she comes from a family that's survived one of the worst atrocities in our history. And I think she really does take that burden on her shoulders to keep it going.
Your kids are like such proud Jews. It's like the best thing to see it, especially with everything going on right now. It's a beautiful thing. So Stella just had her bat mitzvah. And in the wake of so much heaviness, it must have been such a light to see our traditions continuing no matter what. Like, did she reference or did you maybe think about your family that was caught up in the Holocaust as she was carrying on this like incredible tradition in our faith?
Yeah, I think it's important, and that's part of sort of embracing our culture in Judaism, is that anytime there are reasons to celebrate, we must celebrate, and that is part of uh, perpetuating our traditions and our values. And I think anytime we have a simcha or celebration, I think that is, we're doing that for those that survived, and we're doing it for those that did not survive. And that's why we did our son's upshearing in Israel. We could have done it here. We could have done it in our home and just cut his hair and whatever, not made a big deal of it. But we felt like we need to sort of be making a big deal out of every little simcha, because I think, again, like, not everyone has the opportunity to do that, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially coming from lineage where so much family was lost in the Holocaust, like we do have to take every opportunity to celebrate for sure. You do a lot to help victims of anti Semitism here in the States by providing pro bono free medical services to them and really getting them their confidence back and their lives back medically. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you got involved in that?
Yeah. So shortly after October 7th, I was getting notifications and tagged in about a GoFundMe that a young man was raising money to basically get care to fix a broken nose. And the story behind that, there was this young 19-year-old man that was beaten up on the Lower East Side for being Jewish, went to the hospital, and they said he had a broken nose and they needed to see someone who could fix it. He didn't have insurance, so he was raising money. So people were flagging me on this social media post, and I just sort of commented on this post. I said, I'm a plastic surgeon. Give my office a call. I'm happy to see you. No charge. And so he called my office and he came to see me the next day. Fortunately for him, he was just kind of bruised and swollen, but it wasn't broken. But it was in that moment that I sort of said, hey, would you film a video with me? And he said, okay. So I told his story. And then I also put out a PSA. I said, if there's anyone that is unfortunately assaulted for being Jewish, to contact my office and I'll take care of you for free. And I didn't really think much of it because I wasn't anticipating that this was going to happen that often, but happened way more often than I thought. And so now people are contact my office, unfortunately, frequently, people from in New York and then people from outside of New York, from all over the world. And it sort of expanded to victims of October 7th in Israel. And I've taken care of soldiers, and I've taken care of Nova Festival survivors and people who had anything like minor scarring or lacerations or surgery for broken noses and things like that. So for me, it was just a way for me to give back and to sort of feel like I'm contributing in a positive way to everything that's going on.
I mean, it's amazing that you're doing this work, but also so sad that there are so many incidents. Like, I'm sure you would love to see a world where you're not getting contacted for this kind of work by anyone.
Right. No, I agree completely.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Fun fact, I know you and I talked about this like a couple months after your interview came out, but I don't actually think that you and Kate have ever met. But the where I was trying to go with that is that you shared that your great uncle was in, I think it was when he was in Mauthausen, and they saw leaflets like coming down, and they heard German, like a German voice over the loudspeaker. And we're pretty sure that that voice that your great uncle heard was Kate's grandfather's voice.
It's crazy.
Is that
Yeah, it's
crazy?
pretty amazing. Yeah, it's an unbelievable, just, it's wild to think that. I mean, how could they, my great uncle or the fact that they could even imagine a couple of generations later that they'd be reconnected with descendants. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was shocked when that happened because we filmed your interview in like August, and then I filmed Kate's interview in October. And when she shared that, I think my jaw fell to the floor. I was like, wait, you don't understand. I just heard this story about Mauthausen. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So I hope that you and Kate will get to meet in New York at some point.
Definitely.
Yeah. Anyway, I had to share that with you because we've never had a connection like that. I mean, we've had
Crazy.
like similarities of like, I can point to certain things and say, oh, your grandparent was on the same death march as this grandparent, it's just
Right.
like a crazy, crazy thing. Yeah. So to end on a light and fun note, is there like a family tradition or something that survived from the Holocaust that you still do today in your family?
Yes, I think the one tradition that we enjoy a lot is eating my mother's chicken soup. And so that's something that has sort of stood the test of time, and it's my kid's favorite, soup, and it's sort of like the classic Jewish, medicine, so to say. And but my mom does an amazing job, and her mom taught her. So I think that's something that we've passed on from, and even Lizzie's made it before, and Lizzie did it. She's not one to be found in the kitchen, but she's done it, and she does a good job. So hopefully one of my kids will keep that going.
Yeah, that's amazing. Think about how many generations back, even that recipe, that your grandmother probably learned it from her mom. And part of your decision to become a doctor was because your great uncle wanted to be a doctor when he came to the States, right?
Yeah, he was older, and I think he always wanted to become a doctor. And I think that by the time he got here, he was discouraged to going that route, and he ended up having a successful career in fashion. And I think my mom always grew up where doctors were sort of held on a pedestal, and I think it was always her dream, because of her family's dream was for her two sons at least to become doctors. And part of it, I think, the reason why doctors are sort of held to considered a great profession among Jews is that I think that because we're oftentimes forced to leave our comfort zone and leave countries and go to other countries. If you have a business, you can't take it with you. But if you have a skill set, that's something that we could sort of take with us. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think medicine is something that's aspired to and looked upon favorably among Jewish people. And so, yeah, I think my mom always wanted to make him proud. And I think getting us to become physicians was definitely something that she took great pride in, and something that I took great pride in, so that he could see. And he definitely was very proud of us. And I think that it was nice for him to see that we could sort of achieve that due to their ability to survive.
Yeah. Do you think about him in your practice today when you see a patient or anything like that? Does his memory come up for you as it relates to work?
Yeah, I think about him, and I think about my grandmother, and I think about the fact that they were able to survive and come here and give us sort of the opportunity to thrive here. I think about often. I also sort of joke about how, like, my grandfather, who was not a survivor, but he actually worked with my great uncle in his factory. He was a tailor. My great uncle was a fashion designer and used to make coats and everything and very high end stuff. And I always joke how my grandfather was a tailor, and I'm basically a tailor, just with more expensive equipment, but basically doing similar things, just at a little different level, I guess you could say.
Stitches are stitches, right?
Exactly. Stitches are stitches. Same principles, just different subjects and different tools. But
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing more of your story with us and sitting down and diving deep into it. So, thank you so much.
thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to If You Heard What I Heard. If you'd like to learn more about our work and support our mission to make sure the world never forgets, please visit our website, ifyouheardwhatiheard.com. We will never let these stories be lost. It is the job of our generation to make sure future generations never forget so that it never happens again.